Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, AP Euro students at Keystone Oaks High School. This is your first installment of the year of what has become legendary. And of course, I'm talking about the infamous SIGCast. Um, so we've been working on LEQs and introducing you to how to write a thesis, how to write a contextualization paragraph, and how to set up those essays, which are going to be really, really crucial for your success on the AP exam. But in the meantime, we need to continue with some of the content that falls along the curriculum guide. So we're going to start our next unit, and this is called Centralization. And what we're really referring to here is also an era known as the New Monarchs. Okay, so again, title your notes and write down Centralization and put in quotation New Monarchs. And what we're describing here are rulers with a new style. And these new rulers here in the 1400s into the 1500s will start consolidating and centralizing their power, drifting away from what we know as decentralization that occurred during the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and feudal times. And what these people are going to do is create the foundation for Europe's first modern nation states, especially in France, England, and of course Spain. They weren't nation states yet in the modern sense. Populations didn't necessarily feel that they belonged to a particular nation. Their consolidation of power was mainly aimed at taking power away from the nobility and other powers, other powerful nobles in their realms. And identity at that particular time, and why I say that people didn't really feel like they belonged to a nation. Still, people really believed that they belonged to whatever region or locality or municipality that they belong to. Just like during feudalism or during the Dark Ages, people really only cared about where they lived and who offered them protection at that particular point. There's the bell. The modern notion of nationalism as we know it didn't really truly exist and emerge until the late 18th and early 19th century. It's important to note that these monarchs are not to be confused with absolute monarchs, which really won't emerge until the 17th century and the 1600s with the likes of Louis XIV. These monarchs will reduce the power of the clergy in their domains. These are traits that these new monarchs portray, and these monarchs will also increasingly gain the right to determine the religion of their subjects. They also created large bureaucracies. That's another trait that you might want to associate with these cats. This allowed them to begin centralizing their control over their domains and their realms with really forced loyalty of the nobility. They also were able to start forcing them to pay regular taxes, so they regulated taxes. And many times they did this by increasing the political influence of the bourgeoisie or the middle class and the merchant class that was emerging here in the 15th century. And again, they did this because they couldn't trust the nobility, and they went beneath the nobility because they knew that people in the bourgeoisie and the middle class would be grateful for their positions and less likely to challenge their authority. And again, at the same time, these merchants brought revenue to the crown while being thankful and loyal for their positions that they were allowed, in fact, in a government position that was traditionally open only to the nobility. During this era, new rulers or monarchs will also increase the public and national debt by taking out loans from merchant bankers like the Medici in Italy or the Fugger family in Germany. So these are all traits of these new monarchs or the centralized authority. Next, we take you to, and this is all from the key concept outline in the AP Euro guidelines, but the first major power to break from the feudal cycle were Spain and France. They really started to centralize their states and really dominate other areas outside of their states, such as Italy, the rest of Europe, as well as even in the New World in the case of Spain. France was traditionally dominated by, their different local rulers or the internal nobility. And as it says in this next bullet, Spain had really been dominated by the Moors, also known as the Muslims, which occupied them for centuries. Okay, so Spain and France would eventually emerge into the strongest European powers. Both of these countries started with the process of centralization with the military and then expanded that to control taxes and religion. They increased the monarch power by allowing these monarchs to purchase gunpowder. This allowed them to use muskets and cannons at the increased the vulnerability of the nobility, their armies, their castles, and their vassals and their mounted knights, which were loyal to them. So, again, the first thing you need to do is strip away the nobility's power to fight you and to test your power. And that's what they began to do. They used this gunpowder and the ability to purchase this gunpowder to increase their military strategy to their advantage, while also developing disciplined infantry and artillery units, which consisted of common people who could easily overcome highly skilled knights. This is kind of known as a bit of a military revolution in Europe, and it's continued into well into the 19th century. The increased cost of a modern army, because of all these, paying people, paying common people, as well as purchasing really heavy duty technical equipment that used gunpowder, proved to be beyond the financial capability of most of the nobility. So you know the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So for joining sides, the nobilities were rewarded, the noblemen were rewarded for becoming loyal subjects to these monarchs. And because of their loyalty, a lot of times the nobility was paid for their support with titles and offices while serving in the royal court or serving as royal officials. So we kind of get this new political change where these kings are getting the nobility to kind of succumb to their authority. So this is what we mean by centralization. As stated earlier, Ferdinand and Isabella united Castile and Aragon, and their first primary focus was ridding the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors and the Jews. So they used the Spanish Inquisition, which was actually conceived by Isabella, to enforce the power of the monarchy as well as the church. The Inquisition targeted conversos, which were Jews who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of backsliding back to Judaism. This sparked a wave of anti-Semitism that actually spread to other parts of Europe, including Germany, by 1509. The Inquisition in Spain was so successful that by 1500, Cardinal Ximenes succeeded in ridding Spain of abuses and opposition to reform in the church, something that did not happen in most of the other countries in Europe. This is why Spain and France did not turn Protestant during the Reformation, while Germany and a lot of other places had their issues with Protestantism, Calvinism, and Lutheranism. When Ferdinand and Isabella conquered Spain, they set up a new system that centralized power in primarily two ways. They gave more lawmaking and tax collection power to themselves at the expense of the nobility, and they reduced the role of the power of the nobility, as we said, was a trait. Great examples of this were the Hermandades, which translates into the Brotherhood. It was an alliance of Spanish cities that were created basically to keep watch over and enforce and make sure nobles were being loyal and paid taxes to the crown. They also started to suppress the individual rights, wants, and needs of the nobility. In France, Charles VII set up the first ever united army run directly by him, as well as enhanced his taxation privileges. Charles VII's policies continued under his son Louis XI, also known as the Spider King. He created a large royal army and became famous for his cunning and ruthless treatment of the nobility, both individually and within the governing body of the French government, which was known as the Estates General. His nickname would have made Machiavelli blush. To pay for his ability to take on his political opposition, he began raising taxes, exerting power over the French clergy. He also looked to increase the French economy to his benefit. He encouraged foreign merchants and craftsmen to immigrate to France. He promoted new industries such as silk weaving to build up and boost the economy. He also entered into commercial treaties with England, Portugal, and the Hanseatic League. So again, to promote his success, he was also looking to improve the economy overall of France. His successor, Francis I, Valois, contributed to France's emergence as a new monarch and powerhouse with his Concordat of Bologna, which marked the beginning of the Gallican, also known as the French Church. It was an agreement between King Francis I of France and Pope Leo X that Francis negotiated. Again, Pope Leo X is the same pope that did battle with that drunken little monk, Martin Luther, in Germany. The King of France gained the power to appoint bishops to the Gallican or French Church. It marked a fatal blow to powerful papal influence in France. It also was significant because it gave the king the lucrative authority and control over a more powerful run state church. More power to the king, more power to the state. It will also be one of the reasons that France does not become Protestant during the Reformation. Francis also instituted a tithe, which was a direct tax on all lands and property. This enabled the French government to expand its budget on things such as a large army and a large bureaucracy. By uniting the taxes and militaries of these large states, Spain and France soon found that this new money and power made them almost unstoppable against the other powers in Europe. Both were able to invade and profit heavily from the Italian city states, who were too localized and small to stand a chance on their own. France invaded in 1494, and then again Spain under Charles V will sack Rome in 1527. One other note geographically, as you can see on this map of Europe by 1550, centralization and consolidation of power was a Western phenomenon. It occurred more in the West than in the East. And actually, in Eastern Europe, we see monarchs actually growing weaker. And so we'll talk about this dynamic between West and East, East and West, where the Western powers grow economically, politically, power and influence, where in many cases, a large portion of Central and Eastern Europe will remain divided, remain weak, and also, have things like serfdom and really backwards, almost like being in the Dark Ages, almost like being in the Middle Ages. So that'll be a continuing trend that we'll see. Will be a theme that we'll deal with during and right after the First World War, all the way up until then. So for now, that concludes this portion of centralization. So please add these to your notes and add some supplemental information and be ready to go for the next class. Thank you. I don't have any cheesy music to play, so I'm fading out. Good night, good morning, or whatever time of day it is.